The monitor beeped once, then paused. A flat line. For a second, the whole room seemed to stop breathing. Code blue. Room 306. The nurse's voice cracked through the silence, and suddenly the world erupted into motion. Gloved hands moved swiftly. Defibrillator pads were slapped onto skin. A crash cart screeched in, and a flurry of white coats surrounded the still body of a woman in her early 50s. Her eyes were closed, her face pale beneath the surgical lights. A breathing tube protruded from her mouth, taped awkwardly to her cheek. There was blood along the corner of her lip, nearly invisible under the glare, and the side of her neck was slightly swollen. Heart rate dropping. BP is crashing. Push another 1 milligram epinephrine. We're not losing her. They didn't know her name. Not really. To them she was just another patient, just another body on the table. But behind the sterile walls, behind the code numbers and medical urgency, she was someone else. Her name was Linda Carter. And this was not how her story began. 3 weeks ago, she was still making tea in a quiet kitchen just before dawn, in a house that creaked with the weight of memories. She was folding laundry and watering the violets by the window. She was flipping through the mail and setting aside the coupons she never used. She was still smiling when her daughter called. She was still brushing off a tiny sore in her mouth. Just a small spot. It would go away, but it didn't. Now, under fluorescent lights and the hum of machines, that small spot had a name. It had a stage. It had consequences. Outside the operating room, her daughter Sarah sat curled in a plastic chair, fingers locked tightly together. She stared at the swinging double doors, lips pressed white. She hadn't blinked in what felt like hours. A paper cup of cold coffee sat untouched beside her. Her phone buzzed every so often. Texts from her brother, from her husband, but she didn't look. Her eyes were glued to that door. She's going to be okay, she whispered to no one. She's strong. She's always been strong. Down the corridor, the intercom clicked to life. A calm, automated voice called out a paging code, but it barely registered. Sarah's mind was somewhere else. She saw her mother last week, sitting on that same worn armchair by the window, her fingers tracing the lip of a porcelain tea cup, one with a faint crack that had spidered over time, like the delicate fracture of old porcelain trying to hold itself together. Linda had laughed, weakly, about the sore in her mouth. "It's nothing," she said. "A little ulcer, probably bit my cheek in my sleep. But it's been there for weeks," Sarah replied, frowning. "And your neck, it's swollen." Linda waved it off, that same stubborn tilt to her chin. "I'm fine, sweetheart, honestly." Sarah had wanted to scream, to demand, to drag her mother to the doctor, but something in Linda's eyes stopped her. That wall, that firm, quiet wall that had stood ever since Dad died. Mark Carter, killed by a drunk driver 7 years ago. One moment he was backing out of their driveway, the next, silence. And Linda never quite came back from that silence. She stayed in that old house. She folded herself into routine. She raised the kids to adulthood and watched them leave, and then she stayed quiet. Always quiet. But the sore didn't go away. That tiny, painless ulcer, no bigger than a pinky nail, began to ache. It bled. It throbbed. Her jaw ached. Swallowing grew hard. And Linda, she didn't tell anyone. Not until it was too late. Now, back in the operating room, the monitors blipped erratically. A surgeon leaned over, his brow furrowed under a surgical cap. "There's more infiltration than we expected," he said quietly to the assisting resident. "The tissue is deeper, necrotic, possibly spread to the submandibular region." The resident's eyes widened. "Should we proceed with the extended neck dissection?" The surgeon hesitated. "Get oncology down here. Stat. This isn't just a resection anymore." Another beep. Then two. Then a rhythm. "She's coming back," someone said. A breath of relief passed through the room. But they all knew, this woman, this quiet, stoic, seemingly ordinary woman, had waited too long. And the price for silence might be more than just a longer surgery. The house was quiet in a way that was no longer peaceful. It used to be filled with sound, footsteps, laughter, the clinking of dishes, the buzz of conversation drifting from the kitchen into the living room. Now there was only the rhythmic tick of a clock on the mantel and the occasional creak of floorboards as the wind shifted against the siding. Linda Carter stood at the sink, rinsing a mug under a thin stream of warm water. It was early, too early for most people to be awake, but she had always liked the morning. The silence gave her something predictable, something soft, a clean slate. She dried the cup and placed it back on the hook above the counter. The same mug, the one Mark used to drink from every morning, blue, chipped on the handle, with a faded logo of his alma mater. She hadn't had the heart to throw it out. In fact, she hadn't thrown out much. The house was a time capsule. Photos on the walls, books still arranged the way Mark liked them. Even his old winter coat hung on the rack by the front door. 7 years had passed since the accident, and still, Linda couldn't quite let go of the version of her life where he was still in it. Mark had been her partner, her calm, her compass. They'd met in college, married young, raised 2 children, Sarah and Daniel, and built a life of gentle routines and shared glances that said more than words ever could. His death had come like a tear in the fabric of everything. One moment he was backing out of the driveway to pick up groceries. The next, a call from the hospital. A drunk driver. Instant, no goodbye. Linda didn't cry at the funeral. Not really. She stood beside her children, held their hands, and nodded when people offered condolences. But her tears came at night, in the laundry room, in the garden, in the car when she thought no one was looking. Afterward, the house became her refuge and her prison. Her children had tried. Sarah called every week. Daniel sent postcards from California where he now lived with his wife and 2 young kids. They offered to have her move in even just for a while, but Linda had refused. "This is home," she told them. "I'm fine." She wasn't lying exactly. She had food. She had books. She had her job at the town library 3 days a week, where she filed returns and helped regulars find dusty volumes no one had touched in years. She had her walks in the park, her knitting, her quiet evenings with tea and crossword puzzles. But she didn't have conversation. Not the real kind. She'd mastered the art of polite smiles and generic responses. People would ask, "How are you, Linda?" And she'd reply, "Oh, can't complain," even when she wanted to scream. She hadn't told anyone about the loneliness that pressed into her ribs like a slow, dull ache. She hadn't told anyone how loud the house seemed at night, how she sometimes left the television on just for background noise, how she caught herself setting the table for 2 before correcting it to 1. And she certainly hadn't told anyone about the sore in her mouth. It had started small, just a tiny spot on the inside of her cheek. She assumed she'd bitten it in her sleep. It stung when she brushed her teeth, but she'd had canker sores before. No big deal. But that was weeks ago. Now the sore was still there, red and slightly raised. It had a white edge to it, and sometimes when she sipped hot tea, it flared. She'd caught herself avoiding that side when she chewed. Her neck had begun to feel sore, too. Just a little swelling. Maybe a muscle, maybe a gland. Still, she told herself it was nothing. She told herself the same thing she told her kids when they worried about her. "I'm fine." She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. The woman staring back had silver in her hair that she hadn't bothered to dye in months. Her eyes, once sharp and green, looked a little tired now. There were fine lines at the corners. Her lips looked pale, but her expression was steady, controlled. Linda didn't let people worry about her. It wasn't who she was. She had spent too long being the caretaker, the mother, the wife, the dependable one. After Mark died, she'd promised herself she wouldn't become a burden. Even if something felt off, even if that little voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings, even if she had to Google persistent mouth ulcer at 2 a.m. and scroll through pages of medical jargon that made her stomach twist, she still didn't call the doctor. She still didn't tell Sarah or Daniel. Instead, she pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, wiped the counter one more time, and sat in the living room as the sun crept slowly over the horizon. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, cars pulling out of driveways, dogs barking in backyards, kids chasing buses. But inside the Carter home, everything remained still. Linda sipped lukewarm tea, careful not to let it touch the left side of her mouth, and she waited. It started as a dull ache, not even pain really, just a vague soreness in her jaw that came and went. Linda first noticed it while brushing her teeth, a tiny sting on the inside of her cheek that made her pause. She leaned into the mirror, tilted her head, and pulled back the corner of her mouth. There it was, a small round ulcer, white in the center, red around the edges. It didn't look alarming. She'd had plenty of canker sores before, especially during stressful weeks. Maybe she bit her cheek in her sleep. Maybe it was a new toothpaste. Maybe her immune system was just acting up. She rinsed with salt water. It would go away. Days passed, and the sore remained. It didn't grow bigger, but it didn't shrink either. When she ate citrus fruit, it burned. When she sipped her tea, she winced slightly, just a flicker of pain that made her set the cup down early. She switched to cooler drinks, softer foods, avoided chewing on the left side. It was easy enough to adapt. The swelling in her neck was harder to ignore. At first she thought it was muscle tension. Maybe she slept in the wrong position. But then she felt it one morning while applying lotion, just under the jawline, a firm little bump, not huge, but new. She touched it again, pressed gently. It didn't hurt, exactly, but it felt foreign, like it didn't belong. Still, she said nothing. She considered mentioning it during a routine checkup, but then reminded herself she hadn't scheduled one in almost 2 years. Her primary care doctor had retired. She never got around to finding a new one. Besides, what would she even say? There's a sore in my mouth that won't go away. It sounded small, petty. She didn't want to be dramatic. She Googled it, of course. Late at night, with the brightness on her phone turned low, lying in bed with the weight of the dark pressing in. The search results weren't helpful. They ranged from common irritation to oral cancer symptoms. Each article left her more confused, more uncertain. One page suggested taking photos for monitoring. She tried once, opened her phone camera, leaned in, and snapped a picture. But the sight of the inflamed patch, lit up under the flash, unsettled her. She deleted it immediately. By the end of the second week, the sore had deepened. There were moments when it throbbed. Her jaw began to ache more frequently. She convinced herself it was a dental issue, maybe an infection. She even considered calling the dentist. But the thought of being referred from one appointment to another, the tests, the poking and prodding, it exhausted her. So she waited. She waited and watered her plants. She waited and organized the library's returned books. She waited and told herself stories about temporary discomfort. She told no one. Not Sarah, not Daniel, certainly not the neighbors or her book club friend, Marlene, who'd recently undergone radiation for a thyroid issue. Marlene had told her everything, called her every week to talk about side effects and fears. Linda couldn't imagine doing the same. She had always prided herself on self-reliance. Her children praised her strength. Her friends admired her composure. Even during the darkest days after Mark's death, she had cooked, cleaned, and smiled when people brought casseroles she never touched. Strength had become her identity. Admitting to this unknown, this possibility of something serious felt like unraveling the threads that kept her upright. She pressed her fingers to her neck again. The bump was still there, maybe slightly larger. She told herself it was stress, hormones, a stubborn ulcer that needed more time. She told herself she'd give it one more week. And then, maybe, she'd make a call. Maybe. The first snowfall after Mark died came early that year, late October, unexpected, soft as powdered sugar across the rooftops. Linda remembered watching it from the front porch, wrapped in his old flannel jacket, the sleeves too long for her arms. The world had gone quiet under that snow. Still, hollow. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. 3 weeks since she'd stood beside his closed casket and shaken hands with people whose names she couldn't remember. 3 weeks of nodding when others said how strong she was, how composed. She hadn't cried in public once. Sarah had cried. Daniel too. The way his shoulders shook broke her heart more than the service itself. But Linda, she stayed upright. That's what she knew how to do. Mark's death had shattered her, but not in an obvious way. It wasn't the collapse in the kitchen floor grief, or the scream into a pillow kind. It was quieter, more corrosive, like rust spreading inside metal, unseen until something snapped. He was supposed to be home in 20 minutes. They had planned a normal evening, pasta, a movie, maybe finish that puzzle they'd been slowly working on. He'd kissed her cheek before leaving. She'd said, "Don't forget the sourdough." His last words were, "Got it." The knock came an hour later, 2 officers, hats in hands, apologies etched into their expressions. She remembered the way the world narrowed, sound falling away like someone had turned down the volume. The words instant, head trauma, drunk driver, all of them hitting her, one by one but not quite sinking in. After that, time blurred, days into nights, visitors, casseroles, paperwork. She moved through it like a ghost in her own home. And when it was done, when the last condolence card was tucked into a drawer and the last dish returned to the neighbor, she sat alone in the living room and stared at the wall. There were 2 mugs on the coffee table, one with tea half full, one untouched. She didn't throw it away. She never threw anything of his away. Linda took over everything after Mark died. Bills, maintenance, the garage. Things he used to handle without her even noticing. She learned to shovel the driveway, to reset the circuit breaker, to fix a leaky faucet. She mowed the lawn and changed her own oil. The kids offered to help. Daniel even flew back for 2 weeks and insisted on repairing the back deck. Sarah visited more often, brought groceries, tried to get her to move in. But Linda always declined. "This is my home," she said. "Your father built this life with me. I'm not walking away from it." What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that she didn't know who she'd be anywhere else. This house, this routine, this grief, it had become her identity. A woman who survived. A woman who endured. Eventually, the kids backed off. They had lives to live. Sarah got married. Daniel had his first child. They called regularly, visited on holidays, and never stopped worrying, even if they no longer said it out loud. Linda told herself she was doing fine, and in some ways she was. She maintained the house. She worked at the library. She cooked and read and kept herself busy, but she didn't laugh the way she used to. She didn't sing along to music while doing the dishes. She didn't look in the mirror and see someone whole. Something inside had shifted after Mark's death, not broken but hardened, like clay left out too long, just stiff enough to crack when bent. That shift made her quiet, made her careful, made her cautious with pain, because if she let herself feel too much, even now, 7 years later, she wasn't sure the tears would stop, and maybe that's why she hadn't said anything about the sore. Maybe that's why she pretended the lump in her neck wasn't real, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging weakness, and Linda Carter had spent 7 years proving she wasn't weak. She had spent 7 years folding her grief into corners, smoothing it out like laundry, making everything neat again. She smiled for her children. She took their advice and pretended to follow it. She showed up to family dinners. She made jokes about retirement. But every night, she set the dinner table for one. Every morning she reached across the bed out of habit and felt only cold sheets. And every day, she carried the weight of being the strong one, even when her knees ached and her chest felt hollow. That sore in her mouth wasn't just a wound. It was a threat to the story she'd been telling herself. That she was in control, that she had weathered the storm and come out whole. But now, standing in front of the mirror, pulling her lip back to look at the reddened patch again, she felt a flicker of doubt. The swelling in her neck wasn't going away. Her jaw throbbed at night. Her energy had dropped. She couldn't ignore it much longer. Still, she didn't call the doctor. Not yet. Not today. She put on Mark's flannel, as she often did when she felt uncertain, and walked out to the porch. The air was cold, crisp. The maple leaves had started to fall, blanketing the lawn in amber and rust. She stood there for a long time, watching the world go on without noticing her. And somewhere, deep in her chest, a voice whispered a truth she wasn't ready to say out loud. "You are not fine." Sarah Carter hadn't planned on driving to Allentown that weekend. Her schedule had been packed: 2 parent-teacher conferences, a fundraiser at the elementary school, and her husband had signed them up to host a neighborhood cookout. But something had been nagging at her all week, a feeling, a quiet dread that wouldn't leave. It started with the unanswered texts. Usually, her mom replied within a few hours. A thumbs up, a short "I'm fine, sweetheart." Not long conversations, but enough to reassure. This time, it had been 3 days. Sarah had called twice, straight to voicemail. She left one message, then waited. On Friday morning she called again. Nothing. So she got in the car and drove the hour and a half back to the house she grew up in, the same white 2-story with the green shutters and the porch swing that still creaked when it rained. The driveway was empty, no footprints in the light dusting of leaves. The blinds were closed. Sarah knocked once, then again. "Mom?" She pulled out the spare key she still kept in her wallet, a fact her mother had always pretended to be annoyed about. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon tea and floor polish. The air was warm but heavy, like no one had opened a window in days. "Mom?" she called again, stepping inside. There was movement upstairs, the sound of feet shuffling. Then Linda appeared at the top of the stairs, holding onto the railing, her cardigan slipping off one shoulder. "Sarah," she said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" Sarah dropped her bag and climbed the steps quickly. "You haven't answered your phone. I got worried." Linda smiled, but it was thin. "Oh, I must have left it on silent again. I'm sorry, sweetheart." Sarah leaned in to hug her, and that's when she felt it, a firmness at the base of her mother's jaw, just below the ear, a distinct swollen lump. She pulled back slightly and stared at her. "What's that?" she asked, touching her own neck to mirror it. "Right here. On your neck." Linda reached up half-heartedly, her fingers brushing the area. "It's nothing. A bit of swelling. Maybe I slept funny." "Mom," Sarah's tone shifted, firmer. "That's not normal. I've had it for a few weeks. It's nothing serious. Just a swollen gland. Maybe an infection. How long has it been there?" Linda hesitated. "A while." "And the sore in your mouth?" Sarah asked, remembering something she'd dismissed in a previous call. You mentioned it last month. Is that still there? Linda turned away, started walking toward the bedroom. It's just being stubborn. Some ulcers take time to heal. Sarah followed her, her voice rising. How long, Mom? Linda didn't answer. Jesus, Mom, how long? Linda stopped in the doorway, her hand on the frame. 2 months, maybe more. Sarah stood frozen, hands clenched at her sides. You need to see a doctor. I don't want to make a fuss. This isn't a fuss, this is your health. You can't ignore this. I'm not ignoring it. Yes, you are. You're doing exactly what you always do, pushing through, pretending everything's fine, and it's not. Linda turned to face her, eyes narrowed slightly. I'm not pretending. I'm handling it in my own way. Well, your way isn't good enough this time. There was a long silence, the kind that hangs heavy in the air. Sarah took a breath, softer now. I'm scared, Mom. And I think you are too. Linda sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking smaller, older. I don't want you to see me like this, she whispered. Sarah sat beside her, fighting tears. Like what? Human? Vulnerable? I already know you're both. You don't have to hide that from me. I didn't want to worry you, Linda said, voice barely above a whisper. You have your life, your kids. I didn't want to drag you back into mine. Sarah shook her head. You're my mother. There's no such thing as dragging me back. I never left. Linda looked down at her hands, resting in her lap. They trembled slightly. I was going to call the doctor next week. No, Sarah said firmly. We're going today. Now, Sarah. I'm not asking. I'm taking you in. If I have to drive you myself and sit there all day, I will. Linda sighed, but there was no fight left in her, just a tired kind of resignation. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Sarah stood up, brushing the hair from her mother's forehead. Go get your shoes. I'll get the keys. As Linda rose and walked slowly toward the closet, Sarah turned toward the window, blinking fast. She had known deep down that something was wrong, but seeing it, touching it, made it real and terrifying. Outside, the leaves blew across the lawn in swirling gusts. Inside, a daughter tried to hold herself together, even as the world she knew began to shift beneath her feet. The clinic was tucked behind a shopping plaza, not far from the hospital. It was quiet, beige, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and brewed coffee. Sarah filled out the intake paperwork, while Linda sat silently beside her, hands folded in her lap, her eyes scanning the floor. They were called in quickly. The nurse was polite, cheerful in a way that felt forced. She took Linda's vitals, asked a series of standard questions, and made notes on a tablet. Then she stepped out, promising the doctor would be in shortly. The room went still again. Sarah looked at her mother, who was staring at the posters on the wall. Images of cross-sectioned throats, diagrams of lymph nodes, bulleted lists about oral hygiene and warning signs. You okay? Sarah asked quietly. Linda nodded once. I'm fine. But her voice was flat. The door opened, and a man in his late 40s entered, white coat, calm expression, clipboard in hand. His name tag read, Dr. Patel. Miss Carter? He said, offering a smile as he sat across from her. I'm Dr. Patel. Thanks for coming in today. Linda gave a small nod. I understand you've had a persistent mouth ulcer and some swelling in the neck area? Yes, she replied. A little over 2 months now. Dr. Patel tilted his head slightly, concern registering. Has it changed in appearance? Grown in size? Become painful? Linda hesitated. Yes. A bit of all of that. He asked her to open her mouth, then gently prodded around the lesion with a gloved hand and a lighted tongue depressor. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he palpated the lymph nodes along her jawline and neck. Do you have any pain when swallowing? He asked. Sometimes, Linda said. And my jaw aches at night. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose. I'd like to schedule a biopsy, he said. Just a small sample from the sore, so we can rule out anything serious. Sarah's fingers tensed in her lap. Rule out what? Dr. Patel looked at both of them. There's a chance this could be a persistent ulcer, yes, but we also want to rule out the possibility of something called squamous cell carcinoma, oral cancer. Linda went very still. I'm not saying that's what it is, he added quickly, but given the duration, the location, and the lymph node involvement, we need to be thorough. The room shifted. Sarah glanced at her mother, who stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. Dr. Patel continued, We'll also schedule imaging, CT scan of the head and neck, to see if there's any further involvement. The sooner we get answers, the better. When? Sarah asked. Today, if possible. We have an opening for the CT in about an hour. The biopsy will be done in office. under local anesthesia. He stood. Take your time. I'll have the nurse come in with the consent forms. As soon as the door closed, Sarah turned to Linda. Are you okay? Linda blinked slowly. I don't know. She didn't cry, didn't panic. She just sat there, as though her body had turned to stone. They did the biopsy that afternoon. A quick, painful pinch, followed by pressure and a small adhesive bandage on the inside of her cheek. The CT scan took place in a separate wing of the building. Linda lay perfectly still in the machine, the hum of it filling her ears, her arms crossed over her chest like she was preparing for something final. They were told it would take 2 to 3 days for results, but the tone of the doctor's voice, the look in his eyes, Sarah already knew, and so did Linda. The phone rang on the 3rd day. Linda had been sitting on the porch, watching birds pick at the seed in the feeder, when it rang inside. She didn't move at first, but then she stood, slowly, and went in to answer. Sarah watched from the kitchen, holding her breath. When Linda hung up, she didn't speak right away. Sarah walked to her. What did they say? Linda looked out the window. Her hands were trembling. They want me to come in tomorrow, she said, to discuss the results in person. Sarah felt her stomach drop. That's never good. Linda nodded. No, it's not. Linda didn't sleep that night. She sat in the living room, the old floor lamp casting a soft, amber glow over the armchair where Mark used to read. Her hands trembled in her lap, clasped together tightly. Every few minutes she looked at the clock on the wall, as though counting down to the next unknown. Upstairs, Sarah was packing an overnight bag. She'd insisted on staying with her mother for a few days. Just until we know more. Linda didn't argue. There was something in her daughter's voice that told her not to. Sarah moved through her mother's bedroom slowly, quietly, trying not to disturb anything. Linda had always been meticulous about her space. Every drawer was organized, every photo frame dusted, every blanket folded with precise corners. But when Sarah opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand, she found something unexpected. It was tucked beneath a stack of old crossword puzzles and birthday cards. An envelope, yellowed slightly with time, sealed but never mailed. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable. Strong, even, familiar. Linda, open when you need to hear me. Sarah froze, her fingers tightening around the paper. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope, then called softly, Mom? There was no answer. She walked downstairs and found her mother in the armchair, eyes unfocused, lost in thought. I found something, Sarah said gently. Linda looked up. What is it? Sarah held out the envelope. Linda took it slowly, as though it might crumble in her hands. Her eyes traced the handwriting. She didn't speak for a long moment. I didn't know this was still here, she whispered. Sarah sat across from her. Do you want me to leave? Linda shook her head. No, stay. With careful fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded neatly. She unfolded it, hands trembling slightly, and began to read. My Linda, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. Maybe I never came home. Maybe life got unfair, like it sometimes does. I hope none of that's true. But just in case I didn't get to say goodbye, I want to tell you something. Linda swallowed hard, her breath shallow. You don't have to be strong all the time. Not for the kids, not for me, not even for yourself. You've always carried more than your share, and I worry that without me you'll try to carry it all. Please don't. Let them help you. Let them love you. You don't always have to be the one holding everyone else up. It's okay to lean. It's okay to fall apart. You're still you, even when you're not holding it all together. Her eyes welled with tears, blurring the words. Promise me you'll let them in. Don't hide from them. Don't hide from life. You're still here. You still matter. You are more than what you carry. I love you. Always. The paper trembled in her hands. Linda didn't speak. She simply folded the letter again and held it against her chest. Her shoulders shook once, then again, and finally, the dam inside her broke. Tears came fast and soundless. Sarah moved to her side, knelt beside the chair, and wrapped her arms around her mother. I didn't know he wrote that, Linda whispered through the tears. I didn't know he understood. He always did, Sarah murmured. He saw everything, just like we do. Linda shook her head. I didn't want you to worry. I didn't want to be a burden. You never were, Sarah said. You were a mother. You were grieving. And you were trying to survive. I was trying to be strong. And you were, Sarah said. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, folded into one another under the soft hum of the lamp and the ticking of the clock. Eventually Linda spoke again. "I should have said something sooner." "You're saying it now," Sarah replied. "That's what matters." Linda leaned back in the chair, her hands still clutching the letter. "I forgot what it felt like to let someone in." Sarah gave a sad smile. "We never stopped being here." Outside, the wind rustled the trees. The autumn leaves whispered across the porch steps, and the house, for once, felt a little less heavy. Linda didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The biopsy results, the diagnosis, the treatment, all of it hung over her like a storm waiting to break. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone, and that, more than anything, felt like a beginning. The hospital room was colder than Linda expected, not in temperature, but in mood. Stark, sterile, humming faintly with fluorescent lights and distant overhead pages that bled through the walls. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed in a paper-thin gown, her arms folded tightly over her stomach, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Dr. Patel entered with a folder in his hand, followed closely by another doctor in surgical scrubs. Sarah stood from her chair. "Well?" Dr. Patel offered a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We have the results," he said. "The biopsy confirms that the lesion is squamous cell carcinoma, oral cancer. The CT scan also shows involvement of at least 2 cervical lymph nodes." Linda nodded once, slowly. No gas, no visible reaction. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She leaned against the wall, her hand flying to her mouth. "What stage?" she asked, voice cracking. "Stage 3, Dr. Patel replied, "which means it's localized but spreading beyond the primary site. The good news is that we believe it's still operable." "And the bad news?" Linda asked, her tone calm. Too calm. "The surgery will be complex. We'll need to remove the primary tumor, resect part of the surrounding tissue, and perform a neck dissection to remove the affected lymph nodes. Depending on what we find, there may be reconstructive steps afterward." Linda sat very still. "We'd like to proceed as soon as possible," the second doctor added. "Delaying could reduce our chances of clear margins." "Today?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. Dr. Patel hesitated. "We have a surgical window late this afternoon." Linda looked at Sarah. "Then I guess I'm not going home tonight." Sarah wiped her face and sat beside her mother, reaching for her hand. "You're not doing this alone," she said. Linda squeezed her daughter's fingers but said nothing. The hours before surgery moved slowly and quickly at once, time slipping in strange directions. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, drawing blood, marking the site with a surgical pen. Consent forms were explained and signed. IVs were inserted. Linda tried not to think. She was wheeled down the corridor, just after 4 p.m., Sarah walking beside her until the doors to the surgical suite stopped her. "Mom," Sarah said, bending down, her voice trembling. "You're going to be okay, you hear me?" Linda nodded, her voice steady. "I know," and then she was gone. Inside the operating room, the lights were brighter, sharper. Everything was covered in blue drapes and gleaming instruments. A mask was placed over her face. She felt a cold wash of air. "Deep breaths," someone said. 1 breath. 2. Darkness. Dr. Patel stood over the surgical field, his gloved hands steady. Incision at the left buccal mucosa. "Let's expose the lesion." The assistant held retractors. The room was silent, focused, except for the soft beeping of the monitors and the occasional mechanical hiss of machines. As they cut deeper, the margins became less clear. "Tumor invasion is deeper than expected," Dr. Patel murmured. "Infiltration into the soft tissue of the cheek, possibly the masseter muscle." He paused. "Let's get a frozen section biopsy on the margins. We may need to extend." A nurse moved quickly with the sample. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. When the report came back, the expression on Dr. Patel's face shifted. "Margins aren't clean," he said. "We need to go deeper." They proceeded with a neck dissection, careful not to damage the surrounding nerves. As they reached the lymph nodes, one ruptured slightly under pressure. "Suction," he barked. "Cauterize that vessel." The resident assisting looked pale. "Is she stable?" "Heart rate's holding. Keep her warm." The room buzzed with motion, hands moving with precision and purpose. One wrong move, and the facial nerve could be compromised. One delay, and the tumor could spread further. After nearly 6 hours, the final suture was placed. Dr. Patel exhaled. "Let's close her up. We'll monitor post-op closely. ICU overnight." As Linda was wheeled to recovery, the team cleaned the room in silence. It was the kind of surgery that walked a thin line between routine and disaster. Outside, Sarah paced the waiting room. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from Daniel, from her husband, from friends, but she didn't answer any of them. When Dr. Patel finally appeared, she stood before he even called her name. "She made it through," he said. We removed the tumor and all affected nodes. There were a few complications, but she's stable." Sarah's eyes filled. "Is she awake?" "Not yet. She'll be groggy for a while. But she's strong. She's lucky you brought her in when you did." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling. "She's always been strong," she whispered. Daniel Carter arrived at the hospital just after dawn, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a half-drunk coffee in his hand. His red-eye flight from San Diego had been delayed twice, and he hadn't slept more than a couple hours in the past 36. But when he walked through the ICU doors and saw his sister waiting just outside room 204, none of that mattered. Sarah looked up, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. "You made it." Daniel dropped his bag and pulled her into a hug. "Of course I did. She's still asleep," Sarah whispered against his shoulder. "But stable." Daniel nodded and stepped to the window of the room. Linda lay motionless in the bed, pale and still, her face slightly swollen on the left side, a tangle of tubes and machines surrounding her. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just stood there, staring, guilt tightening in his chest. "She looks smaller," he murmured. "I know." They sat together for a while, the quiet between them filled only by the rhythmic beep of monitors and the occasional passing footsteps in the hallway. Nurses moved in and out gently. The room itself seemed frozen in time. It wasn't until midday that Linda stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. Her head moved slightly against the pillow. Sarah was the first to reach her side. "Mom?" Linda opened her eyes slowly, disoriented at first. Then she focused on her daughter's face and blinked. "Hey," she croaked. "You're okay," Sarah said, squeezing her hand. "You're through it." Linda's eyes drifted. Then she saw Daniel standing at the foot of the bed. Her expression shifted, surprise, then shame. "Daniel," she rasped. "I didn't know you were coming." "I got on the first flight," he said, stepping closer. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" Linda looked away. "I didn't want you to worry." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So you thought you'd just keep it to yourself? Let it grow in your body while we went on with our lives like nothing was wrong?" "I didn't want pity," she said. "I didn't want to be fragile." "You think this is strength?" he asked. "Almost dying on an operating table because you didn't want to bother anyone?" Sarah stepped between them, gently. "Daniel." "No," he said, eyes locked on his mother. "She needs to hear this." Linda turned back toward him, her face unreadable. "I'm not mad because you got sick," Daniel continued. "I'm mad because you didn't let us be there for you. You didn't trust us. I didn't want you to see me like this," she whispered. "Not after everything." Daniel pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down and leaned in. "Do you remember 2 years ago, when I went off the radar for a week?" Linda blinked. "Yes. You said your phone died during a camping trip." He nodded slowly. "I lied." She frowned. "I was in the hospital," he said. "Appendicitis. Complications. I was in surgery for 4 hours and in recovery for 3 days. Linda's mouth parted slightly. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry," he said. "Because I didn't want to be weak. Because—" Apparently, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Silence hung in the room like fog. Sarah sat down, wiping a tear from her cheek. "What is it with this family and pretending everything's fine?" Daniel gave a half-laugh, half-sigh. "I'm sorry," Linda whispered. "I should have said something. I didn't want to face it." "You didn't have to face it alone," Daniel said. "We've already lost one parent. We couldn't bear to lose you too." Linda's eyes filled. "I didn't want you to put your lives on hold." "We'd rather do that," Sarah said, "than plan another funeral." Linda broke then. The tears came slow and steady, trailing down her cheeks. She didn't fight them. She didn't apologize. She just let herself cry. Sarah took one hand. Daniel took the other. "Promise us," Daniel said. "From now on, no more hiding, no more silence." Linda nodded. "I promise." They sat like that for a long time, 3 pieces of a fractured family, quietly starting to come back together. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, clouds thick with the promise of rain. But inside that small hospital room, something had shifted, something had opened. And even in the aftermath of surgery, with pain still humming in her bones, Linda felt lighter than she had in years. Linda's recovery was slow but steady. Each day brought a little more clarity, a little more strength, though she still moved like her body was a borrowed suit. Fragile, unfamiliar, reluctant to obey. She stayed in the hospital for another 4 days after the surgery. Her speech was slurred at first, her throat sore from the intubation and surgical trauma. The left side of her face remained slightly swollen, and the bruising made her look like she'd been in a fight. But she was alive. She could still laugh, even if it hurt a little. She could still feel the warmth of her children's hands in hers. That was more than she had expected to have just a week ago. Sarah stayed with her during the days, working remotely from the hospital's family lounge. Daniel took the nights, pulling the uncomfortable chair close to her bed and dozing off while reading aloud from mystery novels he found in the hospital gift shop. Linda watched them both with quiet awe. There had been a time, not long ago, when she believed her presence in their lives was optional, a gentle weight they carried out of obligation, a memory they'd hold fondly when she was gone. Now, seeing the worry in Sarah's eyes when she forgot to call for the nurse, or the tenderness in Daniel's voice when he helped her sit up, Linda realized how wrong she'd been. They hadn't left her behind, she'd pushed them away. On the 5th night, as rain tapped gently against the hospital window, Linda asked them both to stay a little longer after the nurse did evening rounds. Sarah pulled the extra blanket around her legs. Daniel set down his book. Linda sat up as best she could, then looked at both of them. "I need to tell you something," she said. Sarah tilted her head. "Okay." Linda took a breath, her voice low, rough but certain. "When your father died, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the one person I felt I could fall apart in front of." She paused, letting the weight of that settle. "I thought I had to take his place, be the strong one, hold everything together so neither of you would feel like the world was crumbling. But the truth is, it was." Daniel looked down at his hands. Sarah didn't speak. Linda continued. "Every day after his death I woke up pretending I was okay, pretending I had it all under control. But at night, when you were both asleep, I would sit on the porch and talk to him like he was still here. Sometimes I even set the table for two without thinking." Her voice cracked. "I've never told anyone that before." Sarah reached for her hand. "Mom, I thought if I let myself be vulnerable, you'd feel like you had to fix me. I didn't want that. I didn't want to be another thing for you to worry about, so I wore the armor. And over time, I forgot how to take it off." Daniel moved closer. "You don't need it anymore." "I know," Linda said, tears brimming in her eyes. "This illness, it forced me to stop pretending. And when I did, you were still here. Both of you. Not because you had to be, but because you wanted to be." Sarah was crying now. She wiped her face and smiled through it. "We never left, Mom." "I see that now," Linda whispered. "And I'm sorry it took this long." Daniel leaned in, kissing her forehead gently. "We're just glad you're still here to say it." The three of them sat in that room with no machines beeping urgently, no crisis demanding attention, just the soft patter of rain, the hum of the overhead lights, and the quiet, powerful healing that only truth could bring. For the first time in years, Linda didn't feel like a widow, or a patient, or a burden. She felt like a mother again, and that, more than any surgery or scan or diagnosis, was what saved her. 3 months later, Linda sat once again in Dr. Patel's office. This time not with dread, but with quiet clarity. The walls were the same, the chair still creaked when she leaned back, but everything inside her had changed. Dr. Patel smiled as he scanned the latest scans and test results. "No signs of residual tumor," he said. "The lymph nodes are clear. You're healing well, Linda." She didn't cry, she didn't gasp, she just let out a long, steady breath. "Thank you," she said. He folded his hands. "You still have a long road ahead. Regular monitoring, physical therapy, but you've done something remarkable." Linda looked at him. "I lived." He nodded. "You chose to." Back home, the snow had started to fall again, this time softly, quietly, as if the world itself were exhaling. Linda stood by the window in her kitchen, holding her golden ribbon teacup, watching the flurries drift past. The phone buzzed. It was a comment on her blog. "My mom finally went to the doctor because of your story. She has early-stage cancer, and we caught it in time. You saved her." "Thank you." Linda smiled. A full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She opened a new post and began to type. "Sometimes, the body breaks before the soul is ready. Sometimes, healing starts not with a surgery, but with a sentence. I used to believe strength was silence, that to survive, you had to hold everything in. But now I know that real strength is sharing, reaching, letting people in. If you're reading this, I hope you know, it's never too late to ask for help. It's never too late to start over. Life is not a straight line. It curves, it spirals, it circles back, but every breath you take means you are still in it, still writing your story." She hit publish. That night, Sarah and Daniel came over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just soup, salad, and the kind of conversation that lingered long after the plates were cleared. They laughed. A lot. And when Linda stepped away to the porch for a moment, she felt something unexpected. Joy, Not the fleeting kind, but the deep, steady kind that stays. She thought of Mark. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "I'm still here." The wind rustled through the trees as if in reply. Then, as she turned to go inside, she paused, just for a second, and asked herself something she'd never dared ask before. If I could do it all again, would I still live cautiously, or would I choose to live fully? And maybe that's the question we all need to ask, because in the end, survival isn't just about outlasting the pain. It's about deciding to feel again, to love again, to live again. If this story moves something in you, if you've ever held back a truth out of fear, or waited too long to say what mattered most, tell me, what would you say if tomorrow wasn't promised? Who needs to hear your voice today? Leave a comment below. Let someone know they're not alone. And if this story helped you, please, share it. Let it be a thread of gold in someone else's crack. Because like the teacup on Linda's table, sometimes the cracks are what make us most beautiful. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who've stayed silent the longest. But healing doesn't begin in silence. It begins in connection. So if today's story reminded you of someone you love, if it made you think of a moment you've buried too long, or a truth you still haven't spoken out loud, then maybe this is your sign. Outside Linda's window that night, the snow kept falling, soft, steady, unafraid to cover what came before. And inside, a woman once afraid to ask for help now sits with a golden cracked teacup in her hands, proof that even the broken parts can shine again. Now it's your turn. Have you ever ignored a warning sign, thinking it was just nothing? Is there someone in your life who needs to hear your voice before it's too late? Drop a comment below. Your words might be the gold in someone else's crack. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that heal, inspire, and bring us closer, one voice at a time. Because some stories are too powerful to keep to ourselves.